Hello everyone and welcome back to our course. In the previous lecture, we here loaded in our dataset and set up the imports that we'll need for this project. In this lecture, we're going to start building out the layout for the app. All right, so I'm going to make a new code cell here and I'm going to initialize a new Jupyter-app. So I'll create a variable app and I'll assign it to equal Jupyter- with _ name _ as the argument. This will just get compiled to main when the program is run. Now, if you're not using Google Colab, then you would just use --__ name __, which is the way to create a Dash app if you're not in a Jupyter notebook. Okay. Next up, let's define the columns that we're going to be plotting. So this is going to be an array of strings where each string is a column title. Each column title is going to correspond to one of the features of the car. Okay, and let's start with miles per gallon. Just make sure you have the capitalization exactly as is in the data set. Next, the next feature is acceleration. Now it doesn't show up here, but if you look in the documentation for Vega datasets data.cars, then you'll see all the features and you'll see that acceleration is next. We also have displacement as a feature of the car, cylinders as well, and weight in pounds. Okay, there we go. These are the different features that we'll use. Now you can also use more as well, but these are the columns that we'll plot. Next up, let's start creating the app layout. So we're going to define app.layout and we're going to assign its value. We're going to do that with HTML, which refers to -HTML components. We imported those in the previous lecture. And we're going to create a div. We always have to have this parent element. Then I'm going to create another div for our first set of elements. Okay, the first is going to be a drop down. Okay, so I'm actually going to create html.div again. So I have this series of nested HTML divs. Let's put in an HTML label. We'll call this x-axis. Then I'm going to use --core components to create a new drop down element. And here I'm going to pass in the ID, which is going to be x-axis. I'm going to pass in options as well. This is going to be a dictionary. The label is going to be the feature, and the value is going to be the feature. And that is going to be for every feature in columns. Then as well, the final value here we want, just make sure it's after the options. That's going to be the value, and that is going to be acceleration. So we're going to start with an initial value of acceleration for this dropdown. All right, now let's launch our server and see what we have so far. So for that, I'm going to call app.runServer. And I'm going to pass the mode as inline, so that way it will just be right here in Google Colab. Okay, we get this invalid syntax error, so let's see what we missed. Okay, looks like we just have to, yes, we have to make sure that we don't have this extra curly bracket. Because those curly brackets, those were just for the label and value pairs. Then we have the for loop, and then we have this square bracket to close all of the options. Okay, so just make sure you have all of those square brackets and curly brackets aligned exactly as I do. Then you'll see here, look at that. We have our first element in our app. The label is x-axis. The component is a drop-down menu. The default value is acceleration, but if you click on this, you'll see all the different columns. That's because we have here a label and a value for every feature in our columns array. You can also change the default value to be the first one. Typically that will be done. And then if we rerun this code cell, we will see we're now going to have here, instead of acceleration as the default value, we will have miles per gallon. There we go. All right. Next up, let's put in another element. Okay. So I'm going to put this after my most nested div. I'm going to create here another HTML.div. All right. And in here, we are going to create a very similar process. But this time we're going to define the y-axis. So I'm going to call html.label, and this time instead of x-axis, I'm creating a label y-axis. I'm going to again use dash core components to create a drop-down item. The ID this time is going to be y_axis, and I'm just going to change the ID of the x-axis to have an underscore as well. Then my options, I'm going to again create here. My label is going to be feature, and my value is going to be feature. And then I'm going to loop through here. I'm going to go for every feature in columns. So exactly what we did for the x-axis. So what we're going to be doing here is plotting two features against each other. This is very commonly done for machine learning in order to analyze your data and see how do two different features relate to each other. Is there some correlation among features? All right, great. So now we have two drop-down menus. Let me rerun this code cell, and you will see just that. All right, there we go. We now have x-axis and y-axis. And for the x-axis, we have a default value selected. For the y-axis, we don't have a default value selected, but we could add that just by changing the value here. So in fact, I will do that. I'm going to add here a value, and I can do acceleration. And this time, if I rerun my code cell, I'm going to see that I'm going to have default values for both divs. All right, awesome, there we go. Next up, we can add another element as well. We can add an iframe. This is an HTML component, and it's where we're going to place our chart, where we'll place the chart that we'll build with Altair. So I'm going to go just after my div that contains my X and Y selectors. And I'm going to create another element that's going to be an iframe. So just make sure you have the alignment all set up. Okay, there we go. So just make sure you're still inside of the containing parent div. And we're going to add a comma to create another element. And it's going to use dash HTML components, which we called HTML. And we're going to create what's known as an iframe HTML component. We're going to give this the ID of plot. We're going to give it a height. Let's do 700. Now the height has to be a string, so take note of that. So does the width. Let's do a width of 1200. Then we can set sandbox to equal allow scripts. And we could also optionally set styling on all of our elements if we wanted to. Now let's run our cell, and we're going to see here, we added this iframe object. So what we get as a result is just this huge white element with just a border around it, okay? So there it is. And it's quite huge because we set its size to huge. Let's just set it a bit smaller. Let's do 500 by 900. Then if we rerun this code cell, you'll see that the size of our iframe is going to be smaller. Okay, there it is. That is a lot smaller. Okay. And if we set it even smaller, we can fit it when we're zoomed in. So it doesn't really matter, but this iframe is going to be where we will place our Altair chart. So as you can see, we're going to be showing our data in a slightly different format than in the previous lecture, or in the previous project, I should say. All right, so join me in the next lecture. Here, we are going to build a chart with the Altair package, and we are going to put data into that chart. So I will see you in the next lecture.